Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in the command center of the UES Redemption, watching the galaxy bleed red. Each crimson dot represented a human colony that had gone silent. 4 to 7 worlds, 312 stations, over 60 million souls, vanished in 7 to 2 hours. Status report, she commanded, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb stepped forward, his usually steady hands trembling as he activated his tablet. All Outer Rim colonies stopped transmitting at 0347 Universal Standard Time 3 days ago. The pattern moved inward like a wave. Last signal from Kepler Station was 18 hours ago. Sarah's jaw tightened. Kepler Station was only 6 light hours from Earth. Whatever was happening, it was moving fast. What was the last transmission from each location? She asked. Webb's face grew pale. That's the strangest part, Admiral. Every single colony, every station, every outpost, their final transmission was identical. One word, repeated 3 times. He paused, swallowing hard. Horizon. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah had commanded deep space operations for 15 years, had seen stellar phenomena that defied explanation. But this felt different. This felt intentional. Could be a code word, suggested Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist. Maybe a warning system we're not familiar with. Sarah shook her head. 4 to 7 different colonies with 4 to 7 different command structures, all using the same unknown code word at the exact moment they go dark? That's not protocol. Doctor, that's something else entirely. The main display flickered, showing a tactical overview of human space. The red zone formed an almost perfect sphere, expanding outward from a point near the Galactic center. Whatever had caused this was moving at impossible speeds, faster than any known technology. Admiral, called out Ensign Parr from the communication station. I'm detecting something strange in the quantum foam. There are distortions, like ripples in space-time itself. Sarah moved to his station, studying the readings. The quantum field fluctuations were unlike anything in the databases. They pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost organic, almost alive. Set course for the Titan mining colony, she ordered. It was one of the first to go dark. We need to see what we're dealing with. Webb interjected. That puts us directly in the path of whatever's causing this. Sarah turned to face her crew. 23 officers and enlisted personnel, the best humanity had to offer. They looked scared, and they had every right to be. She was scared too, but fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. Every human settlement beyond Earth is gone, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the command center. Earth itself might be next. We're not just investigating a phenomenon. We're potentially humanity's last hope of understanding what's happening before it reaches home. The jump to hyperspace felt different this time. Usually, the transition was smooth, almost gentle. Now it felt like the ship was fighting against something, pushing through resistance that shouldn't exist. The stars outside the viewport stretched and twisted in ways that made Sarah's eyes water. 4 hours later, they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Titan system. Where the bustling mining colony should have been, they found nothing. Not wreckage, not debris, not even the massive asteroid that had housed the facility. Just empty space. That's impossible, Webb whispered. The asteroid was 3 kilometers across. You can't just remove something like that. Dr. Vasquez was running every sensor sweep available. I'm not detecting any trace particles, no energy signatures, no gravitational anomalies. It's as if the entire colony was never here. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't destruction, this was erasure. Wait, Parr called out, his voice tight with excitement and fear. I'm picking up something. It's faint, but there's a transmission coming from where the colony should be. Put it through, Sarah ordered. The speakers crackled to life, filled with static and something else, a sound like wind through vast spaces, or perhaps breathing. And then, clear as crystal, came a voice. It was human, but wrong somehow, as if the speaker had forgotten how words were supposed to sound. Horizon, the voice said. Horizon, horizon. The transmission cut off, leaving them in deafening silence. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I know what horizon means. Sarah turned to her, dreading the answer. In physics, the event horizon is a boundary beyond which nothing can return, the point where space and time cease to function as we understand them. Vasquez's hand shook as she pulled up a theoretical model. What if horizon isn't a place or a warning? What if it's describing a state of being? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Dr. Vasquez was right, then the colonies weren't destroyed. They were transformed, taken beyond some fundamental boundary of reality itself. And whatever had taken them was still out there, moving toward Earth. The redemption hung in the void where Titan Colony once thrived, its senses reaching into empty space like fingers searching for a ghost. Sarah paced the command deck, her mind racing through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I want a full spectrum analysis of this region, she ordered. If something moved an entire asteroid and 3,000 people, it left traces. We just have to know how to look. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically at her station, running calculations that filled multiple screens with incomprehensible equations. Admiral, I'm detecting quantum signatures that shouldn't exist. The vacuum here isn't empty. It's structured, like the space itself has been edited. Before Sarah could respond, the ship's AI spoke in its calm, synthetic voice. Admiral Chen, I am detecting an incoming transmission from Oath Command. Put it through, Sarah said, dreading what she might hear. Fleet Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. Sarah, thank God, we lost contact with you 4 hours ago. Report. We're at Titan Colony's coordinates. So, there's nothing here. Not just destroyed, completely gone, as if it never existed. Harrison's face went pale. That's what I was afraid of. Sarah, we have a problem. The phenomenon has accelerated. Mars went dark 20 minutes ago. The words hit the bridge like a shockwave. Mars, home to 15 million people. The jewel of human terraforming efforts. So, what do you mean went dark? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. Same pattern as the outer colonies. All communications ceased simultaneously. Last transmission was that word, horizon. But there's more. Harrison paused, his hands trembling slightly. Our deep space observatories detected something before Mars went silent. A distortion in space, moving at near-light speed toward Earth. Estimated arrival time is 16 hours. Sarah felt the deck seem to shift beneath her feet. 16 hours. That was all the time left for the entire human race. Admiral, Webb interrupted, his voice urgent. You need to see this. Sarah turned to see the tactical displays showing space around their position. What she saw defied every law of physics she knew. The empty region where Titan Colony should have been was beginning to bend. Space itself was curving inward, creating a visible distortion that grew larger by the minute. It's a spatial fold, Dr. Vasquez whispered in awe and terror. The dimensions are collapsing into themselves. But this is impossible. The energy required would exceed the output of our sun. Suddenly, the distortion flared with brilliant light. When Sarah's vision cleared, something was floating in space before them. It was geometric yet organic, crystalline yet fluid. It defied description because it existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Looking at it was like trying to see around a corner while standing straight. My God, someone whispered. The object pulsed with internal light, and suddenly every screen on the bridge displayed the same image, a human face. It was familiar yet strange, as if someone had tried to remember what humans looked like but had gotten the details slightly wrong. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. You seek understanding of horizon, it said. The words felt like memories being inserted directly into their minds. You fear what you do not comprehend. Sarah stepped forward, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. What have you done to our colonies? What happened to our people? The face smiled, and the expression was both beautiful and terrifying. They have transcended, as you will transcend, as all thinking beings must eventually transcend. Transcended to what? Sarah demanded. Beyond the boundaries of matter and energy, beyond the limitations of three-dimensional existence. We are the shepherds of this process. We have guided countless species through horizon. Dr. Vasquez found her voice. The colonies, the people, are they dead? Death is a concept of limited beings. They exist in ways your language cannot express. They have become part of something greater. The object pulsed again, and suddenly Sarah could see them. Fragments of images flashed through her mind. The colonists of Titan floating in spaces that had no geometry, their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity, connected to something vast and ancient. They were still human, yet more than human. Still themselves, yet part of a greater whole. This is what you offer. Sarah asked, this transformation. It is not an offer, the entity replied. It is evolution. Your species has reached the threshold. You have spread among the stars, touched the edges of reality. The next step is inevitable. And if we refuse? The face's expression didn't change, but somehow Sarah felt its amusement. Refusal is impossible. The process has already begun. Your homeworld approaches horizon. In hours, all humanity will join the collective consciousness. Webb stepped beside Sarah, his hand moving to his side-arm. Admiral, we could try to stop this thing. Sarah held up a hand. The entity before them was beyond anything that could fight with conventional weapons. More importantly, she was beginning to understand something crucial. You're not conquering us, she said slowly. You're recruiting us. Conquest implies resistance. There is no resistance to transcendence. But there could be, Sarah realized. That's why you're here, talking to us instead of just taking us. You need something from us. For the first time, the entity's perfect composure flickered. The image of the human face wavered, showing something else underneath, something vast and alien and desperate. Speak, it said, and for the first time its voice carried emotion. Sarah smiled grimly. She was beginning to see the shape of their chance. You need us to choose this. Free will matters, doesn't it? Even in transcendence. The entity's silence was answer enough. Then we need to talk, Sarah said. The crystalline entity hung before them in space, its impossible geometry shifting as if trying to find a form their minds could accept. Sarah could feel her crew's terror, but also their desperate hope. They were humanity's last negotiators, standing at the threshold of extinction or transformation. You speak of choice, the entity said, its voice now carrying undertones of something almost like uncertainty. Yet you resist what every advanced species has embraced. Show us, Sarah demanded. Show us what you've shown the others. The space around the redemption suddenly exploded into light and impossible vistas. Sarah found herself standing on what appeared to be a crystalline plane that stretched into infinity, though a rational mind knew she was still on the bridge. Around her, beings of light and energy moved through dimensions her eyes couldn't fully process. These were the Altarians, the entity explained. They ascended 3 million years ago. Sarah watched as graceful forms that had once been flesh and blood dance through folded space, their consciousness intertwined in ways that spoke of perfect harmony and understanding. Yet something bothered her about the scene. They are all the same, she whispered. They are unified. Individual suffering has been eliminated. Individual identity has been eliminated, Sarah corrected. Where is their creativity? Their conflict? Their growth? The vision flickered, and Sarah caught a glimpse of what might have been doubt in the entity's manifestation. Show us another, Dr. Vasquez said, stepping up beside Sarah. Show us a recent transcendence. The scene changed. Now they stood observing beings that moved with less grace, their forms more angular and desperate. These were the colonists from the Outer Rim, Sarah realized. Recent additions to this collective consciousness. They seem lost, Webb observed. Sarah studied the transformed humans more carefully. Unlike the ancient Altarians, these beings retained some individual characteristics, but they move with uncertainty, as if still learning how to exist in their new state. How long does the transition take? Sarah asked. Time is meaningless beyond horizon, the entity replied, but there was evasiveness in its tone. That's not an answer, Sarah pressed. How long before they become like the others? Before they lose everything that made them human? The entity's form pulsed with agitation. Resistance to unity is temporary. All beings eventually accept their new existence. Eventually, Sarah repeated. After how long? Decades? Centuries? Millennia of fighting to maintain their identity before they give up. For the first time, the entity fell silent. Dr. Vasquez had been scanning the transcended humans with equipment that shouldn't have worked in this impossible space, but somehow did. Admiral, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in their consciousness patterns. They are not stable. They are fragmenting. The vision shattered, returning them to the familiar confines of the bridge. The entity's form had become less defined, more chaotic. You have seen the glory of transcendence, it said, but its voice lacked conviction. We've seen slavery, Sarah replied firmly. You're not elevating species. You're consuming them, adding their uniqueness to your collective until they become indistinguishable from every other culture you've absorbed. The process ensures immortality. The process ensures death. Sarah slammed her hand on the command console. You're a parasite. You feed on diversity, on the unique perspective that different species bring, but you can't create that diversity yourself. That's why you need willing converts. That's why choice matters. The entity's form began to lose cohesion, revealing glimpses of something ancient and desperate underneath. You do not understand. We preserve. You preserve nothing. Dr. Vasquez interjected, her scientific mind now focused on the problem. Consciousness isn't data to be stored and archived. It's a dynamic process that requires individual experience to maintain its integrity. By forcing unity, you're destroying the very thing you claim to preserve. The bridge lights flickered as the entity's agitation grew. Billions of species have chosen transcendence. After you erase their alternatives, Sarah said. After you remove their ability to continue existing as they were. That's not choice, that's coercion. The alternative is death. Individual consciousness is fragile, temporary. It's supposed to be, Webb said, surprising everyone including himself. That's what makes it valuable. That's what makes it real. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her crew. They were facing down a force that had consumed entire galaxies, and they were holding their ground through pure human stubbornness. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, stepping closer to the entity. You're going to stop the wave heading for Earth. You're going to return our colonies to normal space. And you're going to leave human space forever. The entity's form solidified again, but now it appeared more alien, more threatening. You cannot compel us. Your weapons are meaningless against. We don't need weapons, Sarah interrupted. We just need to do what humans do best. The entity paused, and Sarah could feel confusion. We refuse, she said simply. All of us. Every human, everywhere. We choose to remain mortal, remain individual, remain stubbornly, chaotically human. And since you need our willing participation for the transcendence to work properly, our refusal breaks your process. The silence stretched for long moments. Then the entity spoke, and its voice carried a note Sarah had never heard before. Fear. You would choose extinction over evolution. Sarah smiled. We choose to define our own evolution. We choose to make our own mistakes, fight our own battles, and find our own answers. That's what it means to be human. The entity's form began to pulse rapidly, as if it was struggling with some internal conflict. But know this, Sarah continued, if you try to force transcendence on humanity, we'll do something you've never encountered before. We'll fight you from within your collective. Every human consciousness you absorb will be like poison in your system, maintaining their individuality, their creativity, their chaos. We'll turn your perfect unity into beautiful, chaotic discord. The threat hung in space between them, and Sarah could feel the entity's ancient certainty beginning to crack. The entity's form writhed in space, its crystalline structure fracturing and reforming as it processed Sarah's ultimatum. The perfect geometric patterns that had defined its appearance began to show cracks, revealing glimpses of something vast and ancient beneath. You threaten us with chaos, it said, and for the first time its voice carried genuine emotion, something between rage and fear. Not chaos, Sarah corrected. Humanity. The bridge around them began to shift, reality bending as the entity's control over local space fluctuated. Consoles sparked and the artificial gravity wavered, but Sarah's crew held their positions. Admiral, Park called out from his station, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. Whatever this thing is doing, it's preparing for something big. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the entity. You're scared, she realized. In all your eons of shepherding species to transcendence, you've never encountered one that could threaten your collective from within. The entity's form stabilized into something more angular, more aggressive. Your species is primitive, your understanding limited. You speak of concept beyond your comprehension. Then educate us. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. Show us the truth of what you are. For a moment, the entity seemed to consider this. Then the space around him exploded into visions again, but these were different from before. Instead of showing transcended species, they showed the entity's origins. Sarah found herself witnessing the birth of the collective billions of years ago. Once, it had been a single species, brilliant, curious beings who had genuinely sought to preserve consciousness against the entropy of the universe. Their intentions had been noble, their methods revolutionary, but something had gone wrong. You weren't always predators, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. You were trying to save consciousness itself from the death of the universe. The visions continued, showing how the collective had grown. Each species they absorbed had indeed been preserved. But in the process, the collective itself had been changed. The original noble purpose had been corrupted by the very diversity it sought to protect. Every species brought their own perspectives on existence, Dr. Vasquez observed. But instead of celebrating that diversity, you homogenized it. You were afraid of what you couldn't control. The entity's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Order was necessary. Chaos leads to extinction. Chaos leads to evolution, Webb countered. Chaos leads to growth. Sarah saw the complete picture now. The collective had become addicted to the process of transcendence, needing the fresh perspectives of new species to maintain its own existence. But each absorption diluted those very perspectives until they became meaningless. It was a cosmic-scale addiction, destroying what it claimed to save. You're dying, she said softly. Not physically, but spiritually, intellectually. You've absorbed so many species that you've lost the ability to generate new ideas, new solutions. That's why you need willing converts, their conscious choice to join add something your forced conversions can't. The entity's form began to collapse in on itself, then expand, then collapse again, a visual representation of its internal struggle. Show us our colonies, Sarah demanded. Show us what you really did to them. The vision that appeared nearly broke her heart. The colonists weren't transcended beings dancing through higher dimensions. They were trapped, their consciousness partially absorbed into collective but not fully integrated. They existed in a liminal state, neither human nor transcended, suffering in ways that had no name. They're in pain, Dr. Vasquez gasped. They resist unity, the entity admitted, its voice now carrying notes of something that might have been shame. Their individual will persist beyond normal parameters. Because humans are stubborn, Sarah said with fierce pride. Because we don't give up. Because even when faced with impossible odds, we keep fighting to be ourselves. Suddenly, Park's voice cut through the metaphysical conversation. Admiral, the wave heading for Earth has stopped. Sarah turned to the tactical display. The massive distortion that had been racing toward humanity's homeworld had indeed halted, hanging motionless in space like a held breath. You're maintaining the effect manually, she realized, turning back to the entity. It's not a natural phenomenon. You're actively controlling it, and controlling it is taking all your attention. The entity's silence confirmed her suspicion. That's your weakness, Webb said, understanding dawning in his voice. You can't multitask at this scale. Maintaining the transcendence wave while simultaneously dealing with our resistance is pushing you to your limits. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said urgently, if we can force it to lose concentration, the wave might dissipate entirely. Sarah felt a dangerous plan forming in her mind. It was insane, probably suicidal, but it might be humanity's only chance. Send a message to Earth, she ordered Park. Full broadcast, all channels. Tell them what we've learned. Tell them that if they all refuse transcendence simultaneously, if every human on Earth says no at the exact same moment, they might break the process entirely. Admiral, Webb said quietly, what about our colonies? Our people trapped in the collective. Sarah looked at the entity, which had gone ominously still. Can they be freed? The process is irreversible, the entity said, but its voice lacked certainty. That's not what I asked. Can they be freed? Long silence. Then, theoretical possibilities exist. Then here's the deal, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of her species. We'll help you. We'll work with you to find a solution that preserves consciousness without destroying individuality, but only if you release our people and withdraw from human space. The entity pulsed with what might have been hope or might have been desperation. You would collaborate with us. We would teach you something you've forgotten, Sarah replied. We'd teach you how to preserve consciousness without consuming it, how to celebrate diversity without destroying it. But it has to be a partnership, not a predation. The space around them trembled as the entity considered this proposal. Sarah could feel the weight of billions of years of existence pressing down on this moment, could sense the collective's desperate hunger for a new path forward. Choose, Sarah said simply. The entity hung in space before them, its crystalline form cycling through patterns of light that spoke of internal debate spanning eons. Sarah could feel the weight of cosmic history balance on this moment, could sense ancient consciousness struggling with concepts it had forgotten how to process. You offer partnership to beings you cannot comprehend, the entity said finally, but its voice carried less certainty than before. We offer partnership to beings who have forgotten how to grow, Sarah replied. You've spent so long preserving consciousness that you've stopped creating it. Around them, the space near where Titan Colony had been began to shimmer. Reality folded in ways that hurt to perceive directly, and suddenly they were not alone. Figures materialized on the bridge, translucent, shifting, but unmistakably human. Sarah. The voice was weak but familiar. Commander Jackson from Titan Colony stood before them, his form wavering between human and something else entirely. Tong. Sarah stepped forward, then stopped as she realized the danger. Can you hear me? Are you all right? Jackson's form solidified slightly, his face showing the strain of fighting for individual expression. We're still here, still fighting, but it's hard to remember who we were before. Around the bridge, more figures appeared, colonists from the outer rim settlements, miners from the asteroid belt, scientists from the research stations. All of them partially absorbed, all of them struggling to maintain their humanity against the collective's pull. How many? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. All of us, came the reply from dozens of voices speaking in unison, yet somehow maintaining individual tones. 60,200,412 human souls, all trapped between states of existence. Dr. Vasquez was scanning frantically, her instruments picking up impossible readings. Admiral, their consciousness patterns are destabilizing. The entity can't maintain this partial integration much longer without either completing the absorption or releasing them entirely. The entity's form pulsed with agitation. This demonstration weakens a collective structure. Individual consciousness creates chaos in the unity. Then let us go, Jackson said, his voice growing stronger. You've tasted human consciousness now. You know what we bring to the collective. You know why we're dangerous to your perfect order. But also, Sarah added, you know what we could offer if you work with us instead of consuming us. The entity's response came not in words but in visions, a flood of images showing possible futures. Sarah saw humanity and the collective working together, human creativity and chaos channeled into solving the fundamental problems of consciousness preservation. She saw new ways of transcendence that didn't require the destruction of individual identity, so species preserved not as pale shadows in a collective but as vibrant contributors to a greater symphony. But she also saw the risks, the collective's ancient structure crumbling under the strain of true diversity, the possibility of both species being destroyed in the attempt to forge a new path. It would mean change, she said, understanding the entity's hesitation. Real change, not just the absorption of new perspectives. You would have to let go of billions of years of certainty. Change has always been human nature, Webb added. We specialize in taking impossible situations and finding third options. The ghostly figure of Jackson smiled, and for a moment he looked fully human again. That's what humans do. We break things that can't be broken. We find answers to unsolvable problems, and we never, ever give up. Suddenly, Park's voice cut through the tension. "Admiral, I'm receiving a transmission from Earth." "Put it through," Sarah ordered. Fleet Admiral Harrison's face appeared on screen, but behind him Sarah could see something unprecedented. Representatives from every nation on Earth standing together in what looked like the United Nations Assembly Hall. "Sarah," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the light years with crystal clarity, "we received your message. All of humanity, every person on every world, every station, every ship, we're ready." "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. Ready to choose. Ready to say no to transcendence, no to absorption, and yes to remaining human. But more than that, Sarah, we're ready to show these ancient beings what humanity is really capable of when we work together. On Earth, Sarah knew, 7 billion people were preparing to speak with one voice. But not the unified voice of a collective, the chaotic, diverse, impossibly complex voice of a species that had learned to disagree and still cooperate. The entity's form began to fracture more severely. Unity is strength. Chaos is destruction. Chaos is life, Sarah counted. Chaos is growth. Chaos is the price of consciousness. She turned to Jackson and the other ghostly figures. "Tom, if we do this, if we force a collective to choose between releasing you and risking its own destruction, some of you might not make it back." Jackson's smile was purely human. "Admiral, we've been dead for 3 days. Anything else is a bonus." Sarah looked at her crew, at the entity, at the impossible situation they found themselves in. Then she did what humans always did when faced with impossible choices. She made up her mind. "Earth," she said into the communications array. "Do it. All of humanity, all at once. Refuse transcendence with everything we have." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across space, Sarah could feel it. Millions of voices raised in defiant refusal, not the coordinated response of a hive mind, but the chaotic, stubborn, gloriously human chorus of a species saying no in a billion different ways. The effect on the entity was instantaneous. Its carefully maintained form collapsed entirely, revealing what lay beneath, something vast and ancient and utterly alone. The collective's perfect unity cracked under the strain of humanity's absolute refusal to be unified. "Choose," Sarah said one final time. "Partnership or destruction." The entity's response came not in words but in action. The space around them exploded with light as transcendence barriers dissolved, as consciousness patterns were released, as 60 million human souls were suddenly free to be themselves again. Commander Jackson solidified fully, his form no longer wavering between human and other. Around the bridge, the ghostly figures of the colonists became solid, real, alive. But more than that, Sarah could feel the entity itself changing. The ancient patterns of the collective were shifting, adapting, learning to embrace chaos instead of fighting it. "Partnership," the entity said, and its voice was no longer the voice of a single ancient intelligence, but something new, still vast, still alien, but touched now by human complexity. Sarah smiled as she watched the impossible become routine, as a species once again proved that the most powerful force in the universe was not unity or transcendence or ancient wisdom. It was a stubborn, chaotic, beautiful refusal to give up being human.